booth outside, actually. We're kind of demoing a new app, Edge Wallet, that we just launched recently after a rebrand from our old prior app, Airbits. But today what I want to talk to you about forks. So I kind of titled this talk, Freedom to Fork, because I think that this phenomenon of blockchain technology and the fact that we can do this thing of actually forking a blockchain and forking a currency is fairly unique and in a way powerful. It's a powerful tool for kind of the freedom of money and helping us define and find what is the right money that we actually want and use. But I think at the basics, I want to kind of start at the basics. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with what exactly even is a fork. Like, we've heard the term. A lot of people are both worried about it. Like, what should I do? How do I get my money? Will I maybe lose money? So I'll kind of go over most of this presentation is just kind of describing what the hell is forking of a blockchain and a currency, and then cover a little bit about, okay, well, what can we do about it? And then what exactly is it bringing to the economy of cryptocurrency, if not to our world? So the word fork kind of has its history in just software development. We call things like a code fork simply taking a basis of code, copying it, and then changing a few things. And this predates cryptocurrency. We've done this before, especially in the open source world. Just copy someone's code. It's kind of like plagiarizing. Copy someone's paper, change a few words, and submit it. Suddenly it's yours. But it's definitely a much more open practice in the open source world because people can now change code for how it fits them. In a way, we've done that with Bitcoin already. So Litecoin is a code fork of Bitcoin. It's a completely different blockchain, operates independently, but has some similarities. Same with Zcash. Now we talk about the forks that are actually the same chain of forks. So a soft fork, one might be familiar with the soft fork that we did on Bitcoin to implement new functionality such as SegWit. So that happened quite a few months back. And I'll talk a little about the difference. And then hard fork, this is kind of an interesting one. This is where we actually change the rules and create a completely new currency that has a completely different set of rules. Similar to a soft fork, it does retain some old properties, introduce some new ones. But the main difference between these two is that a hard fork softens the rules. If there's a specific rule set that says, hey, this transaction is valid on the network, and if you transmit a transaction that is invalid, we then say, sorry, we're going to throw it out. What a hard fork does, it says, you know, we're going to expand the rules. We're going to say you can actually do things that were before invalid. In the discussion of the block size increase, that is the scope of what happened. People wanted to propose a hard fork where we say that, you know, before a larger block was invalid. Now we're going to make it valid. And that would have caused a potential split in the network. So the different kind of hard forks is if we just change the rules and we make them more loose, but everybody agrees, then the chain just continues as is. Right? That's if everybody agrees. I think we learned in the blockchain space, we rarely ever all agree. It just doesn't simply doesn't happen. So we end up with our what we're called chain splits, where the two chains kind of diverge, and there's then the potential for money that existed at this point in time to now be shared across two different currencies at a later point in time after the split. And so this is a hard fork. And this is kind of the premise of what I'll be talking about mostly today, because this is kind of the most interesting phenomenon that we've come across in the past year of cryptocurrency. The first hard fork that really made a lot of headlines was on Ethereum, actually. So Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, where a decision was made to change some of the rules, whereby some money existed in a contract that people didn't want to exist, change it, and so now there are two currencies. So at one point, it was only one Ethereum, and at a later point, we now had two different chains. But everyone who had money here had money on both chains after that. So one of the biggest concerns in the hard fork kind of arena is this thing called a replay attack. Now, what in the world is a replay attack? How many people here think that, feel like they could stand in front of here and describe to everyone else what a replay attack is? Awesome. I actually have purpose. I was worried I might be talking to people and I'm like, oh, what the hell is that? So the best analogy to a replay attack is thinking of just, let's take the legacy banking system, like what we normally use. Normally to pay money, you say, cut a check. Some banks will say that check is valid because, your signature's in the right place, the dollar amount's correct, everything looks good, and I'll go ahead and cash it just fine. But in a hard fork scenario, what we basically did is we took the banking system and everyone's deposit and account numbers and balances, and we copied it onto another parallel banking system. So what's the problem with that? I take this check and I actually want to deposit into one banking system. I go to the teller, and what do? They photocopy it, and they deposit into the other banking system at the same time. So while you only wanted to spend one of your currencies, you actually spent both. Same source, same destination account, because the account numbers exist on both banking systems. You actually sent twice the amount of kind of coins or money as you thought you would. That's called a replay attack, where you only intend to send one, but you actually send on both. And this is a result of the fact that in a hard fork, all addresses and transactions that existed before the fork exist after as well. But because the transaction format could look exactly the same, you can replay it onto two. So there's ways of kind of preventing this. And the technology world is kind of figure, okay, what can we do to prevent that? So there's two kinds during a hard fork. One's kind of the mandatory, and one's the opt-in. Mandatory is actually really simple. We just simply say when we go and create this new banking system, we say we're going to make the check look different. We're going to say, instead of putting the signature on the bottom right, let's put the signature on the bottom left. If we see a signature that's on the bottom right, that new chain, that new banking system is going to just throw it away. It's an invalid transaction. It just doesn't work. And then the opposite is true. If someone wants to create a check on the new chain, signatures on the bottom left, the old chain is going to say that's an invalid transaction. So this is what we call mandatory, because after the fork, no matter what, you cannot accidentally spend money on both chains. This is what Bitcoin Cash did. Bitcoin Gold, Bitcoin blah, 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 Diamond, Silver, everything that you've seen kind of after Bitcoin Cash has done what's called mandatory replay protection, because the intent, when they implement this onto a new chain, the intent is to create a completely new currency. We're just trying to give all the previous owners of the old currency credit. We're trying to airdrop money into their hands in this new system. But that's mandatory replay protection. I think that's kind of what we're seeing going forward. Opt-in is kind of the dangerous one. And this is where, there's a few different ways of doing opt-in. I'll kind of cover one example, which gives you an idea of how this works. So in the analogy of this check, we could say that the new chain is actually very flexible. It could say, I'll take a signature that looks the same as the old chain. So this transaction, this check, is actually valid in the new system. But if you wanted to spend money only in the new system, you could put the check over here on the bottom left. And that's going to get rejected by the old chain. So that's an opt-in, meaning you don't have to protect the transactions, but you could. And usually, when we see forks, anyone here familiar with the almost happened SegWit2x fork? No one's familiar with it? So it's happened again. It's been a while ago now that it's almost forgotten in people's minds. Usually, this is the kind of replay protection you'll see when the changes that are being made to a chain are not with the intent of creating a new currency, but with changing the old one. We're saying, no, we want to change the rules, but we want to be the same coin. And then the opt-in replay protection is a way, in case the old chain still exists, for you to at least target where your money goes. So this one, this is the kind of thing, if you start hearing in the industry, keeping your ears close to the industry, and you listen to what your wallet providers kind of email you and your exchanges email you, if they say that there is a hard fork potentially happening, it doesn't have mandatory replay protection, keep your ears open, because this could be trouble, because you might accidentally do one of these transactions and spend on both because of the replay potential. So Bitcoin Cash, BCH, the hard fork, it did institute mandatory replay protection, and so they did the equivalent of this. They changed the transaction format, and so you can only spend on one and not the other. So SegWit2x had no, and I think I had no replay protection. I think I mentioned that. Why? Is the intent of this fork was not to create a new currency. It was to change the old one. But that's only successful if everyone agrees. And if people don't, we now have two currencies with the dangerous possibility of spending on both. So just some tips. Before a fork, spend your money into one address. Now, this has both benefits and disadvantages. For those of you that are into cryptocurrency for privacy purposes, many wallets will actually change your address with every transaction. It's called an HD wallet, hierarchical, deterministic, and that way you don't necessarily have an association of the different money you've received and the different money you've spent all to one person. Right? Every transaction will create a new address. You'll receive money to a new address, and it almost gives you like several identities on the blockchain. But if you put it all into one, then you've combined all those identities into one. But the reason why this can be important is after a fork, you now have money in these two banking systems, but you may want to get it out. If you've got your money in a whole bunch of addresses, maybe hundreds of addresses, you may have to go one by one to each address and use a third-party tool to extract your money out. It's easier if the money is in fewer, if not just one address, for extraction. Some cryptocurrencies are single address. Ethereum happens to be one. You don't generally have a lot of Ethereum addresses, but any derivative of Bitcoin, if you're using a kind of conventional new wallet, will give you multiple addresses. The other tip, which I should have mentioned as well, is own your keys. Make sure that you're not leaving your money on a service. And many people use the word exchange, but it's not just exchange. It's also hosted wallets. So there are some services that are not exchange. You can't buy or sell Bitcoin or trade crypto, but the wallet itself holds your private keys. If they hold your private keys, the decision as to whether or not you get access to the forked coins is entirely their decision, not yours. So that's probably the first tip I should have mentioned even before this, is make sure you're using a service, an application, a wallet, where you have access to the keys yourself, because now you have control of whether or not you want to deal with the forking of the coins or not. But then also this little sub-tip, which is spend your money into one address. Sometimes that might be as simple as taking an address from your wallet and then spending all your money into that address. It's still all in the same wallet, but at least it's in one address. After the fork, if the big danger, right? If you ever hear of one fork coming up with no replay protection, this is kind of this could happen to any of the coins. I think we found out that this just doesn't work in Bitcoin because the industry just won't agree. But it could happen to Litecoin, Zcash, to some degree even Ethereum. All of those this can happen. So keep your ears out. If these keywords start to show up in talk and news, CoinDesk and whatnot, probably the most important thing to do is just don't spend your money right after the fork. Just leave it in the wallet, put it, of course, in keys that you own, and then leave it in the wallet. And start listening to emails, talk to your wallet vendor, because they might be able to implement some functionality that prevents you from accidentally spending it to two of these addresses when you didn't really intend to. So that being a really, really key tip. Listen to the industry, listen to your wallet provider after that. And the part that I'm really excited about, and it both tears my heart, pisses me off, but also makes me excited, is why are we doing this? Why are we forking Bitcoin and changes and Ethereum and whatnot? Well, to me, exactly that's forking is freedom. We've never been able to do this with money before. This is mind-blowing and fascinating. We've had money since almost the existence of humanity, and we've been able to implement alternatives to whatever is the kind of standard money. If it's gold, being able to implement silver, or vice versa. I don't remember the order of which came first. But implementing a new money and trying to get people adopting your new money is definitely a challenge. And usually when there's a network effect of people owning and holding some kind of money, the ability to implement something new is very challenging, especially when you have the established not interested in moving over their value. So we have had shifts and changes in economic systems and in monetary policy and the types of money we use. But forking allows us the ability to propose a new and different money, but give all of the previous holders a stake in it. And that's what's very powerful, incredibly interesting, and never before possible. Like, I have never heard of the ability to do this. Way back to the days of when we had shells as money, you couldn't say, I don't like the white shells, I like the black shells. But I'm going to have everybody that had a white shell an equivalent number of black shells. Couldn't really do that. And especially with dollars. I can't suddenly say, I hate the dollar banking system. I'm going to introduce Paul dollars, and everybody that has a dollar now has a Paul dollar, but now I've got this new way of transferring Paul dollars that the old dollars couldn't do. But now you have a stake in this entirely new economic system. What will that do? This is kind of a brave new world. We've never seen this. We've never been able to do this. But I think fundamentally what it does is it introduces competition in money. So we already knew that cryptocurrency was competing against fiat. Forking keeps cryptocurrency honest. It allows crypto to compete against crypto. Now, A lot of people hate the idea. They call it an attack. I hear that word way too often in the cryptocurrency world. It's an attack, it's an attack, it's an attack. I usually say if you're saying that, then you're just worried about whether or not your system or what you've built is of any good. Because Satoshi Nakamoto, when he built Bitcoin, fundamentally said, go ahead and attack it. If it doesn't work, it'll fail, fine, I didn't do it right. But it was built to be attacked. It was built to be selfish, for people and the actors are selfish in the system, not to be behaved. And I think this is an extension of that. Because if someone can fork your coin, introduce something better, airdrop credit into everyone that had your coin and get people to adopt it, then they did improve on what you built. And so I think, like I'd mentioned, the same way that crypto gives fiat a run for its money and true competition, this now opens the playing field. And we have and will continue to see, especially I think in the course of 2018, a significant amount of forks. There's a new one that I just spent half an hour talking to someone in the hall at our booth about with Litecoin Cash, being the first hard fork of Litecoin. It will have replay protection, so you don't have to worry about all the scary stuff, but you do have to worry about getting access to the coin. But it may introduce a compelling set of functionality that Litecoin doesn't have and competes pretty fairly against it. And that's one of the nuggets that definitely excites me. Hopefully it excites you too and it doesn't just scare you. But really, freedom of choice is inconvenient. A lot of us, especially in the developed world, have delegated our choice. And we've said, you choose for us, just choose something right, and then I can sue you if I don't like it. But having freedom comes at a cost. And it is a little tedious to deal with forks. But in the end, I feel like that's what will create a solution that really will thrive, that the mass desires. So let me shameless shill a little bit. Hopefully I've given you some information that's useful and you can take back with you that had nothing to do with Edge in our company. But I'll present a little bit about what we do at our company that can hopefully help with anything in the crypto space that you're interested in. So our company, prior, we had a Bitcoin wallet, mobile, iOS, and Android, since 2014, purely focused on Bitcoin. And we just rebranded the company and launched a new app, Edge, which now incorporates multi-currency. So it's got Bitcoin, Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash. You can split your Bitcoin into Bitcoin Cash if you happen to have held it before the fork. Dash, Ethereum, and any ERC20 token. You can add any in there with exchange functionality to convert between all of those different assets. Just launched yesterday. It incorporates all of the kind of security that we've been building into our Bitcoin wallet for the past 3-4 years. And I do have a fundamental belief that one of the biggest values that Bitcoin brought to people is the ability to own your own digital money. That was the single thing that we have never, ever been able to do before Bitcoin, is own our own digital value. You may have had accounts and be able to send it and receive it, but you never actually owned it. So in that spirit, our wallet gives you the ability to control your own money. You own the private keys. No one can send your money, not even I, the CEO of the company. So, but we present you with a familiar experience, key management experience, where you just feel like you're logging in, creating an account, but your keys are encrypted and backed up and synchronized with great two-factor protection and all the little bells and whistles that I can talk to people about at our booth. And I think that is it. So that is my hopefully not too long presentation on forks and what we do at Edge. And happy to, I think I may have some time to take questions. Thanks. Yep. So the Litecoin fork, I need to study it a little bit further, but if it were a fork of Litecoin that was as similar as Bitcoin Cash is to Bitcoin, we could support it trivially. My understanding is they're actually implementing some functionality from Zcash, which changes signature formats, changes the cryptography used, which is definitely more challenging. Fortunately, we're in close talks with Zcash themselves to actually implement support for Zcash as a plugin into Edge. And so some of that work could carry over in supporting Litecoin Cash, since it's using some of the similar cryptography. I can't give a definitive answer yet, but we would definitely like to, with the capacity that we could. But we don't have any announcements as to whether or not we will. However, with our wallet, you can extract the private keys, the master seed and private keys. So if you're in a hurry to get your Litecoin Cash out, so long as it's in Edge before the fork, you could extract the keys and use any of the tools that do support Litecoin Cash to get access to the funds. Yes, I think I saw that hand first. I want to address the last thing you said. Hopefully, for those that couldn't hear, are we, through forking and introducing more coins, introducing some of the same issues present with fractional reserve, like basically building out fractional reserve? Because to some, at the surface level, it may seem like that's true because you're introducing more currency into the market, the way fractional reserve and federal currencies would normally do. I fundamentally think that's entirely different. And why fractional reserve is fundamentally different from forking is that you are not inflating the same currency. You're not taking that dollar that I have in my bank and making that specific currency worth less. You're introducing a new one, and it's up to the industry, it's up to people to choose to move their value into that new currency. You didn't make that decision for me. So someone can fork Bitcoin, but if they could introduce, instead of 21 million coins, 100 million coins, if nobody decides to hop onto that chain and use it and give it value, then those same 21 million Bitcoin still have the same value. You cannot arbitrarily inflate my money without me choosing to do so. So I think there's a fundamental difference in that. Now, you gave me some motivation to try out your new ecosystem by airdropping some money, but you haven't necessarily inflated my money. And so that's the key difference that I think is at the heart of what we can do in crypto versus what the current system is doing with Federal Reserve, fractional reserve, and inflation. So the question about, well, what about the issue of having two mediums of exchange, two units of accounts? We've got hundreds of currencies today. This is nothing new. Yes, you'll have to deal with currency conversion. The idea is that once people have settled, and we're in a very early phase of crypto where people have not yet settled, once we have settled, there'll be a handful of those, maybe 100 of those, but we'll have at least had a free market to help bring us to the deciding factor of what exactly is it that we want, as opposed to being locked in via the network effect of a single currency and not being able to introduce a new one. So while, yes, there's more confusion, and just like I said before, having freedom has its cost. But I think in the end, it will be to our benefit. Cool. I got one more question. I've got a couple of minutes, so. It's just simply the effort, just like saying, why do some wallets support one fork versus another? And the same efforts that we would have to go through, exchanges have to go through as well. It's not something you can just snap your fingers and suddenly you have the infrastructure, the nodes, the front end, the back end to support an additional coin. Now, we can, over time, make it easier in the same sense that it was really hard for us to make Airbit support forked coins. It's much easier for us in Edge because we've kind of planned for that and architected for it, but it's still never going to be free. And so it's just a business, and in a business decision, you say, well, what can I make out of implementing this fork versus the effort involved? And that is purely at the heart of the decision that different companies such as us and exchanges will have in the factor of whether or not they implement it. So as someone potentially implementing a fork, you've got to give them a compelling reason, both marketing, technical, adoption, to say, yes, this is worth supporting, but that's up to you. So your company supports all forks? Not all forks, all tokens on Ethereum, because it's easy. But all the forks, we have to evaluate one by one as well, right? The energy involved. Cool. Thanks a lot, guys.